I want to talk to you a little bit today about writing with rules, or why we write with rules, or what the rules of writing are. This talk is called "The Rules of Writing Suck," but prepositions can save us. And I don't know if that's the case, but let's go with it for now. Most of us, when we think of ourselves as writer, think first of ourselves as an academic writer, somebody who writes in school, or a professional writer, somebody who writes at work. Now, those of us in this that are in this class right now are trying to build a different sense of ourselves as a writer, a poet, or a novelist, or a short story writer, a memoirist. We are trying to build a sense of ourselves as doing something different with writing than just what a teacher tells us, which is kind of ironic because I'm sitting here talking to you, telling you what to do with your writing. Because many of us start with our notion of writing in school, our senses of ourselves as a writer are often pretty warped. Now, I don't necessarily believe that your writing teachers before this class were abusive or detrimental or terrible people, although certainly all of us have had one of those kind of teachers before, at least, who have hurt us more than they helped us. But here's one of the things that happens. After 12 years of school, 13 years, 14 years, if you consider preschool and kindergarten, after all those years of school, we have had 12, 13, 14, many other teachers tell us how to write. And each of those teachers were telling us how to write within their given context, within their different given class, within their given assignment. And sometimes those assignments had very different rules for each of those assignments. But as students, we don't necessarily understand all that stuff about context. We just know that Mrs. Winglebottom is telling us to write, and we got to do what she says. And what happens with our brains, our writer brains, is that all those teachers over those years start to merge into one massive teacher in the back of your head who's telling you how to write. That teacher for me looks like my dad, who's telling me what to do and how to do it. I've never really been a very great rule follower. I've always bucked against the rules a little bit, except those rules have always had a psychic effect on me as a person. They always make me wonder if I'm doing it right or wrong, if I'm being good or bad, if I'm a sinner or a saved person. I start my first year composition classes. Those English classes that you take right when you come into the institution that set you up for writing in your college courses. I start that first level course with an exercise where we write the rules of writing up on the board. No fragments. Don't use I. No slang. And we write those rules, and we keep on writing those rules. And what we often find when we're writing those rules is that sometimes they're contradictory. Somebody will yell out, "Oh, my teacher told me to write all sentences with 5 to 7 sentences, or all paragraphs with 5 to 7 sentences." And another person will go, "What? No, wait, I was told 10 to 8 sentences." And they start to yell these rules out, and some of them are contradictory, some of them are more liberal, some of them are more conservative. I don't mean politically, I just mean in the ways that we use language. We put these rules on the board, and we can fill the entire board. And by the time we start to fill that entire board, some people are scribbling for it furiously because we're still in the early part of the semester, and those students think that they're being told what they need to do in their writing. Other people are kind of like sitting there like this, and saying, "I don't want to do this class because this is all about the rules." And then other people are just kind of following along, trying to figure out what's going on. But invariably, there are people who are saying, "Wait, what's the truth? Tell us what the rules are." At some point during all this, I stop and I say, "Okay, let's test the rules a little bit. Can you ever say fuck in a paper?" I did this once in one class, and I had a young woman in the class, brand new 18-year-old fresh person in college, second week of college. She looked up at me and she said, "I don't know. I went to Catholic school. I've never heard a teacher cuss before." At that point, I often generally turn to class and I turn to the board and I start erasing it. And I say, well, here's what I would say about the rules. Fuck them. Fuck the rules. Erase them from your brain. The point of this exercise is to say, writing is not about those individual rules that you might see listed in any given textbook, but writing is about the rules of the context in which you're writing. Writing is writing for context, for audience, for that given situation. And if you can get past that, rather than trying to meet with that person in your brain who's telling you how to write and what a good writer is, you'll be better off. The same goes for creative writing. There are a lot of things people say about creative writing, and a lot of things that those people say about creative writing that get confused in our heads because of all those other rules we've got for writing. Let me read this to you. Don't say I. Don't say you. You don't say. No frags, no run-ons, no fun. Write what you know, you know? Take care with the language you pick. Inappropriate language sucks dick. I wish I didn't have to rhyme. If you say you are lazy because you don't know you. Don't overgeneralize. Use language you use. Read to know language. Write every day. Write every day anyway. And no one writes every day. They lie. Tell lies. Write truthfully. Cliches are only fair in love and war. Write about love and war sparingly. Don't rely on font for meaning. You have poetic license. Contractions are the tool of the devil. Ain't that some shit? Very sentence length. Jesus wept. I want us to try to think about rules for writing, whatever those rules are, whether they are creative writing rules or whether they are the rules that Mrs. Winglebottom told you in the 4th grade that you just can't kick. I want us to think about rules of writing as being this part of our toolbox. We had a reading from Stephen King this week that talked about your writer's toolbox and what that means for us. And he actually talks about grammar and formality in that piece of writing. Even for Stephen King, I would like us to think about our writer's toolbox, about the rules of writing, about the things that we do within writing as situational, depending on the preposition. So you can write with rules. You can write to the rules. You can write near rules, inside rules, on rules, beside rules, under rules, behind rules, between rules, in front of rules, above rules, out of rules, and around rules. You can write with the rule that says you have to write every day, and you can write near that or inside that or on that or beside that or under that or behind that. The preposition thing gets a little strained here, but the idea here is that our rules for writing are just part of our toolbox. And our toolbox really much more depends on the ways we carry that toolbox into different situations and what we're trying to accomplish with it. I'm spending a lot of time talking about rules of writing here, but because what we're really talking about this week, when we're talking about a writer's toolbox and all the rules and all the different exercises we might have, what we're really talking about is building a writer's mind, knowing who we are as writers and getting comfortable with the ways that we can use our different skills and experiences and languages and tools to help us create writing that we want to create. I want to talk about a few different exercises that we could do to really explore that toolbox. Before I do that, let's admit that there are some rules out there that other writers have come up with that at the very least are interesting, if not inspiring, or maybe they're just other rules. Kurt Vonnegut is one of my favorite writers of all time, wrote my favorite novel of all time called Cat's Cradle. And he came up with a list of 8 rules. He's talking mostly about writing stories here. Use the time of a total stranger in such a way that he or she will not feel that his time was wasted. If you're going to give somebody something, if you're going to give something to somebody to read, make sure you're not wasting their time. And, we've been doing a workshop this week. This is a really good rule to think about for workshop. If you're going to submit something for workshop, make sure you're not that person who's going to read it is not going to feel like their time was wasted. Number 2, give the reader at least one character he or she can root for. Number 3, every character should want something, even if it's only a glass of water. And think about this as something that we engage with as readers. We need to know our characters are real people, and desire is one of the realest things that a character can have. Number 4, every sentence must do one of two things: reveal character or advance the action. And again, that's a story specific kind of rule, but it can also be a rule that we adapt for poetry. Every line must do something. It must describe, it must move us. It must push the narrative. Number 5, stay as close to the end as possible. That is, know where you're going and stay near there. Number 6, be a sadist. No matter how sweet or innocent your leading characters are, make awful things happen to them in order that the reader may see what they're made of. Number 7, write to please just one person. If you open a window and make love to the world, so to speak, your story will get pneumonia. He's saying, be focused. Know who you're writing for. Focus on one person. And if you're trying to please everybody, you'll never get there. Number 8, give your readers as much information as possible, as soon as possible. To heck with suspense. Readers should have such complete understanding of what is going on, where and why, that they could finish the story themselves should cockroaches eat the last few pages. Now, why would you want to do that? Why let them know everything? Well, because readers want to be carried, but they want to know where they're going. You can take Kurt Vonnegut's rules and do with them what you will. I love Kurt Vonnegut, and his rules make sense to me. But ultimately, building a writer's mind, knowing where you're going with your writing, is up to you to decide your own rules. And this might actually be a decent exercise to do. What are your rules for writing? This was kind of where this exercise came from. Let's talk about 3 different ways you can go about creating some sense of yourself as a writer, or things that you have in your writer's toolkit that might help you avoid rules and build conditions for writing. The first one is an exercise that I'm calling prepping the materials. One of my favorite writing books of all time was written by Natalie Goldberg. It's called Writing Down the Bones. And in Writing Down the Bones, Natalie Goldberg presents this idea of writing practice. Well, I'm adapting that idea here. I'm calling it prepping the materials. And this is kind of like what an actor does before they go on stage, or what a singer does before she goes on stage, where she gets her voice ready by doing exercises. And I think writing practice, as Natalie Goldberg presents it, is a really excellent way to learn your own writing voice. I sometimes teach it in writing classes as an exercise we do regularly. But just as far as if you're getting ready to do some writing, one way to start that is just by prepping your materials. So here are the rules, or here's the exercise. Grab a comfortable pen and a comfortable pad of paper. Maybe a comfortable seat and a comfortable desk. Maybe find a space that is quiet and separate from other people, or maybe you want to go right on the side of the freeway, because this changing your conditions of writing can really do interesting things for your writing. But at the very least, have a comfortable pen or a comfortable pad of paper. You can do this exercise on a computer as well, but let's think about how you do it by hand. Set a prompt. Find a prompt that will work for you, one that will spur you into writing. And then set a timer for 10 minutes. You set that timer on your phone, or what's really cool is to get a kitchen timer, one of those ones that goes tick, 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 and then dings at the end. You don't want to get distracted by the ticking, but actually having a timer that is running rather than having to keep on looking at your phone that goes pretty silently. That can be effective. Set a timer for 10 minutes. And then once you start it, write without lifting your hand from the page. Don't move that hand off the page. And then that's followed up by the rule, keep your hand moving. So basically, you start at the first second and you start writing and you don't stop. You don't stop to go back and reread. You don't stop to think, you just write. The next rule, lose control. It's one of our tendencies as writers that comes from our academics background, where we really want to control what we say. Lose control, just let go and see where the language takes you. Now, as you're doing this, try to be specific. It's a little contradictory to the previous line, but what it's really saying is use specific language, specific words, specific descriptions, specific details to make your writing come alive. And you get better at that over time. Number 8, don't think. If you think, you get bottled up. Invariably, you're going to remember that you need to pick up milk on the way home, or invariably, you're going to think about that time when you said that one thing to your sister and you feel really bad about it, or invariably, you're going to think about the tests that you have coming due in psychology. If you stop and think, you're going to bottle up. And the whole point of this is to lose control. Let the pen go. And as part of that, don't worry about spelling, punctuation, or grammar. Don't worry about where you're writing on the page. Don't worry about all the things you've been told to worry about your whole life. Let it go. I can sing from Frozen if you would like. Just let it go. Number 10, you are free to write the worst junk in America. And Goldberg goes on in her book to say, in the world, in the cosmos, you are free to write the worst stuff in the world. In fact, that judgment does not matter here. Just write. And then as you write, go for the jugular. That means you are just grabbing at it, seeing where you can go. This should be an intense 10 minutes where you just lose yourself in that moment of writing. If you can learn how to do this, this is a really great way to set yourself up for future writing, for more refined writing, but also just to find material. Here are some prompts that you might use in your writing practice. Remember, find a pen, find a notebook, find a place to write, find a timer, set that timer, pick one of these prompts, start the timer, and start writing. Your timer starts at, I remember, and then you start writing. Your prompt is the wave of blue. You start the timer and you start writing. The wave of blue, and then wherever your pen goes. Things aflame, and you start writing. Night rain, and you start writing. The point is, you find yourself a prompt that allows you to start to just lose yourself within those words. And here's a good piece of advice for doing this. 10 minutes is not a long time, but maybe for the first time you do this, it might feel like a long time. And if you're writing along and you're running out of things to say, repeat the prompt. I remember. You write down a memory, you lose things to say, write down, I remember again. Now, if you go far off that prompt, you start with when I was 8 and you end up talking about when you become 70, cool, whatever. That's losing control. But the idea is that you keep yourself writing. This is a really valuable exercise. It allows you to stretch your voice, to loosen your lips, to see where your voice might take you. The next exercise, killing similes. Similes can be really useful at writing, and obviously they're one of our major tools for doing metaphor. But sometimes their similes are really cliche. As cute as a kitten, as hot as hell, as sweet as sugar. Love is like a rose. What this exercise asks you to do is to take some similes that you might know and see how you can destroy them. as common as dirt underneath my nails as I've been digging a grave for my cat. Not so good. As sweet as sugar bearing down into my cavities and making me grimace. As shiny as a new pin stuck into my heart. The idea of this exercise is find a list of similes like this one and write them out, maybe put them in a Microsoft Word document, and then try to rewrite each one. And you could try to rewrite each one a couple times just to see where it would go. Love is like a rose that is left for you after your other lover has left you a car. This is a pretty cool exercise in helping you to expand your possibility for simile and metaphor and see where it might go. And this is doing it outside of any kind of narrative you might be trying to tell. It's just experimenting with the language, seeing what you can do with different similes. You can find lists of similes online. I think I found these from dictionary.com or something. And you could copy them into your Microsoft Word program and then triple space between each one and just see what you come up with as you try to reinvent or kill the similes. Here's another exercise called material language. And there's a play on words here. As writers, we need material. And we use language to talk about that material. But sometimes language can be made material. It gets into solid form. It means something. There's a thing out there in the world called the CDC COVID guidelines. It's the guidelines that tell us when to quarantine and when to isolate ourselves. I'm going to change screens. So let me stop share. And I want to show you this other screen. So here are the COVID quarantines. There's this really cool device, a really cool online program called Vocab Grabber. And in that Vocab Grabber, you can take any amount of text and enter it into the text box here. And here I've entered the CDC COVID guidelines, and then click Grab Vocabulary. And when you grab vocabulary, it goes through the text and it picks out the most common words that are found in that text and also the most difficult words. And here's what's really cool about this list of vocabulary. I can take out the more simple words. It's already taken out like thes and a's with number one, but I can take out the next level and the next level. And I end up with a much smaller list of words of vocabulary. It's good for learning vocabulary, but it also is good for doing a writing exercise. If you were to take Justice Alito's abortion document, I don't know if you've heard about this, but there's a decision coming down on abortion rights. And if you were to take that and put that in here and then reduce the amount of language to the most difficult words, you might come up with some interesting words to write with. If you did it with the COVID guidelines, you might come up with some interesting words to write with. If you did it with the Declaration of Independence or the 10 Commandments or whatever, Harry Potter, you might come up with some interesting words to write with. All you need to do is go to a document. It's got to be a digital document, and copy the language, put it into the text box, and hit that button, and then you can create the words. So let's go back to my PowerPoint. I have here a list of words extracted from the COVID guidelines: immunocompromised, antigen, symptom, isolate, hospitalize, quarantine, isolation, weaken, ventilate, shorten. What if I was just to randomly pick 4 of these words and then say, I'm going to write a story based around those 4 words. Or pick 10 of these words, and I'm going to write a poem using just those 10 words. What you end up with is some parameters on your writing that allow you to, I don't think I'm sharing my screen. I'm sorry. Let me go back. Okay, here we are. I'm sorry. If you were to grab some of these words, 4 or 5 of them, and use it as a prompt for your writing, you end up with some parameters for your writing that allows you to have some interesting basis for playing with the language and seeing where that language takes you. And if you do it on something you care about, a news story about a school shooting, a review of your favorite album, the lyrics from your favorite song. If you do use specific language drawn from a text that you think might spark you into some meaning, then you are setting yourself up with parameters for writing that could lead you into some interesting spaces. We are in workshop this week, and we're starting workshop this week with, at the same time, we're talking about your writer's toolkit. As a creative writing class is asking you to enter into this space of creation. And you may not be used to that space. It may not be a comfortable space for you, but it's asking you to try it out. My granddaddy in Alabama always had a tool room, a workshop. And I loved going in there, trying to find stuff. But oddly enough, what I really loved was going into his office where he studied the Bible, because he was a preacher. I loved going in there and spinning around in his chair and looking at his books, but I also loved going into his tool room, into his workshop, to see what could be made. As a writer, you're building your own workshop. You're building your own tool space, a place where you create things. And having some tools at your disposal to do that allow you to create things. And I would just want you to think a little bit about the tools that you've had. You've thought about yourself as a reader and how that inspires you to write. You thought about your personal experiences and how those lead you to write. You've thought about metaphor and simile. You've thought about workshop. You've thought about doing different exercises with material language constraints or with killing similes. You've got a number of tools you're already building to become to help you develop your workshop and your writing. Keep exploring and see where you go. Audre Lorde was an amazing poet. She wrote this. She was also a feminist activist, and she wrote this this line in a famous essay, or actually it was a talk that she gave, called "The Transformation of Language from Silence to Action." I think that's the title. It's an amazing talk, and it talks about how women have always been silenced. That women just need to speak. And while this is a very, and particularly she's talking about Black women and people of disability who have been silenced and have been afraid that they could not speak. So while this has a very specific meaning, I think it's a meaning that we can use as writers as well. Because so often our writing selves have been shut down by the schools we have gone to, by the worlds we live in. When you have to go work for 8 hours a day on the line, and then you try to write, we sometimes wonder what's the meaning of our writing. What Audre Lorde reminds us is that when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak. And I don't mean to make light at all of the meaning of Lorde's words for African American, for queer, for women, for disabled writers or voices. But I think it's an important message for all of us as writers. when we want to write, we're afraid that our words won't be heard or welcomed. But if we keep ourselves silent, we're still afraid. We're still allowing that fear to happen. So, fuck the fear. Just write. Find your spaces for creation. Find your toolkit. Find your way around the rules or with the rules or against the rules and write. We'll see you next week.